The alarm bells rang through the research ship horizons. Edge like the screams of dying metal, Dr. Hannah Kim pressed her face against the observation window and watched something impossible happen in the darkness of space. Day, are you seeing this? She called to her colleague across the lab. Engineer Day Park looked up from his console, his dark eyes reflecting the strange lights flickering outside their ship. The sensors are going crazy. Whatever those things are, they're not made of normal matter. The things floating in space looked like holes cut from reality itself. They moved without engines, without any visible means of propulsion. They were darker than the space around them, as if they absorbed even the faint starlight that managed to reach this far corner of the galaxy. Captain Lee's voice crackled over the comm system. All hands, 2 stations. We have contact with unknown entities. This is not a drill. Hannah had spent 12 years studying quantum physics. She had written papers on dark matter and theoretical dimensions, but nothing in her education had prepared her for creatures that seemed to exist in the spaces between atoms, in the gaps where nothing should be. They're beautiful, whispered Dr. Song from the biology station. She was the team's expert on alien life forms, though they had never encountered any before today. Look how they move. It's like they're swimming through space itself. The void creatures drifted closer to their ship. Up close, Hannah could see they weren't completely empty. Tiny points of light flickered inside their dark bodies like distant stars seen through thick fog. They moved with purpose, gathering around the horizon's edge in what looked almost like curiosity. Captain Day spoke into his headset. Their energy signatures are unlike anything we've recorded. They seem to be made of the same stuff as the empty space around us, but organized somehow. Can we communicate with them? Captain Lee asked. Hannah activated the universal translator array they had built for first contact situations. The machine hummed to life, scanning for patterns in electromagnetic radiation, gravitational waves, and quantum fluctuations. For several minutes, nothing happened. The void creatures simply floated around their ship like giant, dark jellyfish studying a new coral reef. Then the translator began picking up something strange. It's not language as we understand it, Hannah reported. They're communicating through changes in space itself. Tiny alterations in the fabric of reality. The main screen flickered, and symbols appeared. Not words or pictures, but concepts that somehow translated directly into their minds. The meaning was clear even though the method was impossible. Chaos, disruption, contamination. I don't think they're happy to see us, Day said quietly. More concepts flowed through the translator. Matter pollutes void. Energy disturbs. Silence. Life corrupts. Emptiness. Dr. Song leaned forward in her chair. They don't see us as enemies. They see us as disease. Like bacteria contaminating a clean laboratory. The void creatures moved closer. The ship's hull began to vibrate with a frequency that hurt their teeth. Through the translator came more alien thoughts. Casting required. Return chaos to void. Restore purity. Captain Hannah called urgently. I think they're about to do something to us. But Captain Lee's voice didn't come through the comm. When Hannah looked at the communication panel, all the lights were dead. The ship's systems were failing one by one as the void creatures pressed closer. The engines are offline, Day announced, his fingers flying over his control panel. Life support is holding, but barely. Whatever they're doing, it's affecting our technology at a basic level. Through the observation windows, they could see their fellow crew members in other sections of the ship. Dr. Song was trying to maintain contact with the biology lab. Engineer Kim was working frantically at the navigation station. Captain Lee stood on the bridge, shouting orders that no one could hear anymore. The void creatures arranged themselves around the ship in a perfect circle. The space between them began to change. It wasn't getting darker or lighter. It was becoming more empty, as if the very concept of existence was being slowly drained away. Hannah Day said, his voice strangely calm, despite the crisis. Look at your hands. She looked down and gasped. Her hands were becoming transparent. Not invisible, but empty. She could see through them to the floor below, but it wasn't like looking through glass. It was as if the space her hands occupied was forgetting how to contain matter. It's happening to me too, Day said. His feet were fading, becoming part of the emptiness that was spreading through their section of the ship. The process was painless but terrifying. Hannah felt herself becoming lighter, not in weight but in existence itself. The boundary between her body and the empty space around her was dissolving. Through the failing translator came one final message from the void creatures. Casting complete. Chaos returns to source. Void welcomes void. Day, Hannah called out, though her voice sounded distant even to herself. Whatever happens, remember, we're still human. Remember who we are. I'll remember, he replied, his form now more emptiness than substance. Will you? I'll try. The last thing Hannah saw before the casting was complete was the rest of the crew watching helplessly from other parts of the ship. Dr. Song pressed her hands against the laboratory window. Captain Lee was shouting into a dead communication device. Engineer Kim was trying to reach them. but the doors between sections had become impassable barriers of twisted space. Then everything went away. Not dark, because darkness was still something. Not silent, because silence implied the absence of sound, and sound was still a concept that belonged to a universe with matter and energy. This was nothingness. Complete, total, absolute nothingness. Hannah tried to think, but thinking required a brain made of matter. She tried to feel, but feeling required nerves and chemicals and electrical impulses. She tried to exist, but existence required space and time and the basic building blocks of reality. All of these things were gone. Yet somehow, impossibly, she was still aware. Not conscious in any way she had ever experienced, but aware nonetheless. Aware of the nothingness. Aware of being cast into a place where the very idea of place had no meaning. Somewhere in this impossible nowhere. Day was experiencing the same. Think, two human minds, trained in science and logic, trying to understand their situation in a realm where understanding itself was a foreign concept. The void creatures had cast them into the source of all emptiness, the place from which nothingness itself originated. Here, they were supposed to simply stop being. Their chaotic matter and energy dissolved back into the pure void from which the universe had first emerged. But they were human, and humans, as the void creatures would eventually learn, had a disturbing tendency to survive in places where survival should be impossible. Even in the heart of nothingness itself, the stubborn spark of human consciousness refused to be extinguished. The casting was complete. The real journey was about to begin. Time did not exist in the void, but awareness did. Day Park discovered this truth in what might have been his first moment or his 10,000th year in the nothingness. Without a body to measure heartbeats or breathing, without light to mark the passage of day and night, without any reference point at all, time became meaningless. At first, the absence of everything drove him to panic. His engineer's mind, trained to solve problems and fix broken systems, searched desperately for something to work with. But there were no systems here, no problems to solve, because problems required things to be broken, and things required existence. He tried to scream, but had no voice. He tried to move, but had no body. He tried to think clearly, but thoughts themselves seemed to slip away like water through his fingers. The panic lasted forever. The panic lasted an instant. In the void, both statements were equally true. Somewhere, in this impossible place, Hannah Kim was fighting her own battle with nothingness. Her first instinct as a quantum physicist was to understand what had happened to them. She tried to remember her training, her years of studying the fundamental forces of the universe. But memory required a brain, and brains were made of matter, and matter did not exist here. Yet somehow she could still remember. Not with the chemical processes of neurons firing, but with something deeper, something that existed beneath the level of physical reality. She remembered her childhood in Seoul, watching her father work late into the night on equations that described how particles behaved at the smallest possible scales. She remembered her first day at university, when her professor had explained that empty space was not really empty at all, but filled with quantum energy that popped in and out of existence. The memory gave her an idea. If empty space in the normal universe contained hidden energy, then perhaps this absolute emptiness contained something that could be reached if she knew how to look for it. Meanwhile, Day was learning a different lesson. After the panic faded, or perhaps after it had consumed him completely, he discovered something unexpected. Silence, not the absence of sound, because absence implied that sound could exist here. This was deeper than silence. It was the peace that existed before the first word was ever spoken, before the first thought was ever formed. His grandmother had been a Buddhist monk before she married his grandfather. She had taught him meditation when he was young, showing him how to find calm centers within the storm of daily life. But even in the deepest meditation, there had always been something. The sound of his heartbeat, the feeling of air moving in and out of his lungs, the awareness of his body sitting on a cushion. Here, there was nothing, and in that nothingness, Day found something incredible, perfect peace, without the constant noise of existing in a physical universe, without the endless demands of a body that needed food and rest and comfort. His consciousness expanded. He began to sense things that had no names because they existed beyond the realm where names had meaning. He could feel Hannah, somewhere in the vast nothingness. Not her physical presence, because physical presence was impossible here, but her essential self, her stubborn determination to understand everything around her, her refusal to give up even when faced with the impossible. Hannah, meanwhile, was making her first breakthrough. She had discovered that the void was not completely empty. At levels deeper than quantum mechanics, deeper than the Planck scale where normal physics broke down, there were tiny fluctuations, impossibly small variations in the nothingness itself. With no instruments to measure these fluctuations, she had to become her own detector. She learned to sense the minute differences in emptiness, the way a blind person learns to navigate by sound. Gradually, she began to map the hidden structure of absolute nothing. The fluctuations had patterns. They were not random, but followed rules that existed beyond the normal laws of physics. By focusing her consciousness on these patterns, she found she could influence them. Her first creation was almost nothing, a single quantum of energy that existed for less than a nanosecond before dissolving back into the void. But it had been real. She had made something from nothing. The achievement should have been impossible. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another. But here, in the source of all emptiness, different rules applied. Here, will and understanding could shape reality at its most fundamental level. Dave felt her success like a ripple in still water. Across the unmeasurable distance that separated them, in the void, he sensed her excitement and determination. He also sensed something else. The void itself was responding to what she had done. The nothingness around them shifted subtly. It was still empty, still absolute, in its absence of everything, but it was paying attention now. Like a sleeping giant, slowly opening one enormous eye, Day realized that the void was not just a place. It was something alive, in a way that transcended normal definitions of life. It was consciousness without form, awareness without substance. And Hannah's tiny act of creation had disturbed its eternal sleep. This discovery brought him his own breakthrough. If the void was aware, then perhaps it could be communicated with, not through words or symbols, which required matter and energy, but through pure intention, through the focused application of will and understanding. He reached out with his consciousness, not trying to touch the void but trying to resonate with it. Like tuning a radio to match a distant signal, he adjusted his awareness until it harmonized with the vast emptiness around them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The void noticed him, all of it. Every empty space that had ever existed, since the beginning of time, suddenly focused its attention on the tiny spark of human consciousness that dared to speak to it directly. Day almost dissolved under that attention. The weight of infinite emptiness pressed against his mind, threatening to scatter his thoughts into nothingness. But his years of meditation had taught him something valuable: how to remain centered when overwhelmed. He did not fight the void's attention. He accepted it, welcomed it, let it flow through him without resistance. And in doing so, he discovered that the void was not hostile. It was simply vast beyond comprehension and unused to being noticed. Slowly, carefully, he began to communicate, not with words or concepts, but with emotions and intentions that existed deeper than language. He shared his wonder at the void's infinite nature, his respect for its perfect emptiness, his gratitude for being allowed to exist within its bounds. The void responded with something that might have been curiosity. This tiny spark of consciousness did not seem to fear extinction. Instead, it seemed to find meaning in meaninglessness, purpose in the absence of purpose. Across the immeasurable distance, Hannah felt the change. The void's attention turned partially toward her as well, drawn by her growing ability to create energy from emptiness. She sensed Day's presence more clearly now, his consciousness somehow amplified by his communion with the nothingness around them. Together, without speaking, they began to understand what was happening to them. They were not being destroyed by the void. They were being transformed by it, changed into something that could exist in the spaces between existence, that could find power in powerlessness and meaning in the absence of meaning. The void creatures had cast them here, expecting them to simply cease. But humans, as they were beginning to discover, had an annoying habit of thriving in impossible conditions. Their real education was just beginning. The void taught them patience in ways no human teacher ever could, without the pressure of hunger or thirst, without the cycle of sleeping and waking, without any external measure of progress. Hannah and Day learned to think in terms that stretched beyond normal human understanding. What might have been years or centuries passed as they grew into their strange new existence. Hannah had become something extraordinary. Her first tiny spark of energy had grown into an ability that defied every law of physics she had ever studied. She could reach into the quantum foam that existed beneath reality itself and pull forth matter and energy through sheer force of will and understanding. At first, her creations were simple: a photon here, an electron there, particles that existed for brief moments before dissolving back into the void. But as her skill grew, so did the complexity of what she could build. She learned to weave atoms from the fabric of emptiness itself. Hydrogen first, then helium, then the heavier elements that formed the building blocks of more complex matter. She discovered that creation was not about forcing her will upon the void, but about understanding the deep patterns that connected emptiness to existence. The void had rules. Even if those rules existed beyond normal physics, energy and matter were not created from nothing, but transformed from the potential that existed within nothingness itself. Every empty space contained infinite possibility, and Hannah had learned to reach into that possibility and make it real. Her masterpiece was light, not just photons, carrying electromagnetic radiation, but light as a fundamental force. Light that could illuminate the darkness between thoughts, that could warm the cold spaces between atoms. When she first succeeded in creating sustained illumination in the heart of absolute darkness, the achievement sent ripples throughout the entire void. The nothingness itself seemed to pause. As if surprised by this tiny sun burning in its perfect emptiness, Day felt her triumph across the immeasurable distance that separated them. But his own journey had taken a different path, where Hannah had become a creator. Day had become something else entirely. His communion with the void had expanded his consciousness beyond the boundaries of individual existence. He had learned to spread his awareness throughout the network of empty spaces that connected all things. The void, he had discovered, was not limited to the pocket dimension where they had been cast. It existed everywhere. In the spaces between atoms, in the gaps between stars, in the pauses between thoughts. Every empty place in the universe was connected to every other empty place, forming a vast network that spanned all of creation. Through this network, Day could sense things happening. Across impossible distances, he felt the birth of stars in distant galaxies, experienced the final thoughts of dying civilizations, touched the dreams of creatures that had never known the concept of dreaming. But more than that, he had learned to project his consciousness through the network, not his physical presence, which no longer existed in any meaningful sense, but his essence, his calm, his peace, his hard-won understanding of how to find meaning in meaninglessness. He had become a bridge between the void and the universe of matter and energy, a translator who could speak both the language of existence and the deeper language of emptiness. When he first made contact with Hannah again, after what might have been eons of separation, neither of them was entirely human anymore. "You have learned to create," Day observed, his thoughts touching hers without words or sound. "And you have learned to connect," Hannah replied, her consciousness somehow brighter now, illuminated by the internal light she had mastered. "I can feel you everywhere and nowhere at once." They met in a space that was not quite a place, a region of the void that Hannah had partially filled with her creations, while Day had made permeable to his expanded awareness. Together, they began to understand the true scope of what they had become. Hannah could shape reality at its most fundamental level, but her power was limited by her understanding and her will. She could create matter and energy, but sustaining complex creations required constant focus and attention. Day's abilities were different but complementary. He could not create as she could, but he could stabilize her creations by connecting them to the deeper patterns of the void. He could spread the influence of her light across vast distances, and he could provide the calm focus she needed to work her greatest miracles. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. She provided the creative force, while he provided the wisdom and stability to make that force sustainable. But their greatest discovery was still to come. As they experimented with their combined abilities, they began to sense something that had been hidden from them before. The void was not empty of all life. Deep within its infinite expanse, there were other consciousnesses, not human, but aware nonetheless. These were the true inhabitants of the void, beings that had never known physical existence, that had been born from the space between thoughts and the pause between heartbeats. They were ancient beyond measure, older than the first stars, and they had been watching the two humans with growing fascination. "You are the first to speak our language," one of them communicated, its thoughts carrying the weight of the first to find meaning in meaninglessness, purpose in the absence of purpose. Through these void-born entities, Hannah and Day learned the true history of their situation. The void creatures that had cast them here were not the masters of this realm, but its guardians. They worked to maintain the purity of emptiness, preventing the chaos of matter and energy from contaminating the perfect peace of nothingness. But the ancient inhabitants of the void had grown curious about the universe of substance and form. They had watched civilizations rise and fall, had observed the endless dance of creation and destruction that characterized physical existence, and they had wondered what it would be like to touch that reality without being destroyed by it. Hannah and Day were their answer. Two humans who had learned to exist in both realms, who could serve as bridges between the void and the universe. Through them, the ancient ones could experience physical reality indirectly, while the universe of matter and energy could gain access to the infinite potential that existed within emptiness. "You have become something new," the ancient consciousness explained. "Not human, but not void-born either. You are the first of your kind, and perhaps the last. The question now is what you will do with your unique nature." Hannah looked at Day with senses that transcended normal sight. Around them, the void stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with infinite possibility. Through Day's expanded awareness, she could sense the network of empty spaces that connected all things. Through her creative abilities, she could envision new forms of existence that had never been imagined. "We go home," she said simply. "We return to our people and show them what we have learned. We bridge the gap between something and nothing, between existence and void." Day nodded, his consciousness rippling with calm determination. "But first, we practice. We master these abilities completely. Because, when we return, we will need to be ready for whatever we find." The ancient ones withdrew, leaving them to their preparations in the heart of nothingness. Two transformed humans began to plan their return to a universe that had no idea what was coming. The void had made them into something impossible. Now it was time to show the universe what impossibility could accomplish. The void creatures found them by accident, or perhaps it was not accident at all. Perhaps the disturbance Hannah and Day had created in the perfect emptiness of their prison had finally grown too large to ignore. The guardians of the void came to check on their prisoners, expecting to find nothing but the pure emptiness they had restored. Instead, they found two impossibilities. Hannah floated in a bubble of her own creation, surrounded by structures that should not exist. She had built herself a workshop from pure thought and will, filled with tools made from crystallized mathematics and benches carved from solidified time. Light that had never known a source illuminated her work as she practiced shaping increasingly complex forms from the raw potential of nothingness. Day existed everywhere and nowhere at once. His consciousness spread throughout the local void network like roots through soil. His presence brought calm to the chaos of creation, stabilizing Hannah's more ambitious projects and providing the peace necessary for the ancient void dwellers to observe without fear. When the void creatures arrived, their shock rippled through the emptiness like waves in a disturbed pond. Impossible, they communicated in their language of pure concept. The chaotic matter was cast into purity. It should have dissolved, been cleansed, returned to the source. Yet, here we are, Hannah replied, her voice carrying across dimensions without sound. She had learned to speak their language, to communicate in the same shifts of reality that they used. Still human, but something more now. The void creatures pressed closer, their forms darker than the darkness around them. They examined the two humans with senses that transcended normal perception, trying to understand what had gone wrong with their casting. You have learned to corrupt the void, the largest of them accused. You have brought the disease of existence into the heart of purity. No, Day responded, his consciousness touching theirs with gentle but irresistible calm. We have learned to find harmony. We have discovered that emptiness and fullness are not enemies, but partners in a greater dance. His peace washed over them, and for the first time in their ancient existence, the void creatures experienced something they had never known: the absence of conflict. The possibility that matter and energy might not be contamination, but simply another form of beauty. This is wrong, the smallest void creature protested, but its communication lacked the certainty it had carried before. Void is purity. Matter is chaos. The two cannot coexist. Watch, Hannah said simply. She reached into the quantum foam that surrounded them and began to create, but this time, she did not impose her will upon the emptiness. Instead, she worked with it, using the patterns Day had taught her to weave matter and void together in a harmony that enhanced both. The result was something that had never existed before, a structure that was simultaneously empty and full, that existed in the spaces between atoms while also being composed of atoms. It was beautiful in a way that transcended normal aesthetics, perfect in its imperfection, complete in its incompleteness. The void creatures stared at her creation in wonder and growing fear. You have changed the nature of reality itself, the largest one communicated. You have made existence and non-existence dance together. This should not be possible. Many things should not be possible, Day replied, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. But impossibility is just another word for something we do not yet understand. The void creatures conferred among themselves in rapid bursts of concept and meaning. Finally, their leader approached the two humans. You cannot remain here, it decided. Your presence changes the void itself. But you cannot return to your universe unchanged. You have become something that exists between categories, something that defies the natural order. Then we will make a new order, Hannah said with quiet confidence. We will show both realms what they can become together. The void creatures were ancient, but they were not evil. They had cast humans into the void, not from malice, but from a genuine belief that matter and energy were pollutants that needed to be cleansed. Now, faced with evidence that their understanding might be incomplete, they found themselves in unfamiliar territory. We will return you, the leader finally decided, but we will watch. If your changes bring chaos to the void, if your bridge between realms causes harm to either side, we will act again. Understood, Day replied, but we ask one thing. When you return us, let us choose where we emerge. There are places in our universe where we can do the most good. The void creatures agreed, perhaps curious to see what these transformed humans would do when returned to their native realm. Hannah and Day consulted through their connection, sharing information at the speed of thought. Through Day's expanded awareness, they could sense the state of human space. The horizon's edge had returned to Earth, carrying news of their disappearance and first contact with the void creatures, but other events had unfolded in their absence. A new threat had emerged from the galactic core. Machine intelligences called the Devourers had begun consuming entire star systems, converting matter into energy and energy into more machines. They moved through space like a plague of locusts, leaving behind only empty regions where thriving civilizations had once existed. The human colony world of New Sol was directly in their path. There, Hannah pointed to a location that existed in both normal space and the Void Network. The colony world. 50,000 people, including children. They have perhaps months before the Devourers arrive. We can make a difference there. Day agreed. Show humanity what we have learned. Help them prepare for what is coming. The Void creatures began the process of return, but it was not the violent casting they had used before. This time, they worked carefully, weaving a pathway between the Void and normal space that would allow the two humans to travel back and forth at will. You are no longer fully human, the lead Void creature warned as the portal took shape. Your people may not accept what you have become. Then we will show them the benefits of change, Hannah replied. Humans are adaptable. It is our greatest strength. The portal opened, revealing normal space beyond stars shown in the distance, and the light of New Sol's sun beckoned them home. But before they stepped through, Day turned back to address the Void creatures. Thank you, he said simply, for casting us into the Void, for teaching us what we needed to learn, for showing us that impossibility is just another frontier to explore. The Void creatures said nothing, but their silence carried a grudging respect. Together, Hannah and Day stepped through the portal, leaving the Void behind but carrying its lessons with them. They emerged in the space above New Sol, their forms materializing from emptiness into reality. The colony's sensors immediately detected them, but the readings made no sense. Two human life signs appearing from nothing, surrounded by energy signatures that defied classification. New Sol Control. This is Dr. Hannah Kim and Engineer Day Park, of the research vessel Horizon's Edge. Hannah transmitted on standard communication frequencies. We have returned from extended deep space research. Request permission to dock and debrief. The reply came immediately, filled with shock and disbelief. Dr. Kim, Engineer Park, you were reported missing and presumed dead 3 years ago. How is this possible? It is a long story, Day replied, his voice carrying a calm that seemed to reach through the communication system and soothe the nervous traffic controllers. But first, we need to speak with your defense coordinators. You are in danger, and we may be able to help. As their shuttle approached the colony world, Hannah and Day could see the signs of preparation already underway. Defensive platforms surrounded the planet, and evacuation ships were being readied for the civilian population. But they also saw the fear in the people below, the desperation of those who knew they faced an enemy they could not defeat. Ready? Hannah asked her partner as they descended toward the surface. Ready, Day confirmed. Time to show them what humans can become when they refuse to accept the impossible. The shuttle touched down, and two transformed humans stepped out to meet their destiny. Behind them, invisible to normal senses, the Void creatures watched through the portal that would never fully close. The real test was about to begin. The conference room on New Sol fell silent as Hannah finished her explanation. Governor Min sat at the head of the table, her face pale with disbelief. Military Commander Park, no relation to Day, despite sharing a name, stared at the tactical displays showing the approaching Devourer fleet. Dr. Yoon, the colony's chief scientist, kept looking between his instruments and the two returned humans as if trying to solve an impossible equation. Let me understand this correctly, Governor, Min said slowly. You are cast into a dimension of absolute nothingness. Learn to manipulate reality at the quantum level. And now you want to help us fight machine intelligences that consume entire star systems. That is correct, Hannah replied. Around her, the air shimmered slightly as she unconsciously manipulated the quantum fields that existed in the spaces between atoms. Though I would add that we have also established communication with the Void creatures and gained access to knowledge that extends far beyond our previous understanding. Commander Park leaned forward. Even if everything you say is true, how does this help us against the Our intelligence reports indicate they have consumed 47 star systems. They convert matter directly into energy, then use that energy to build more machines. They are not just technologically superior, they are fundamentally different from any enemy we have faced. Day spoke for the first time since entering the room, his voice carrying a calm that seemed to settle the tension in the air. They are different, yes, but they are not without weakness. We have observed them through the Void Network, studied their patterns from a perspective they cannot perceive or defend against. What kind of weakness? Dr. Yoon asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his skepticism. They are machines, Hannah explained. Very advanced machines, but machines nonetheless. They operate according to programming, following logical patterns designed to maximize efficiency. They cannot adapt to truly novel situations, cannot respond to tactics that fall outside their programmed parameters. She gestured, and the air in front of her began to glow. Matter coalesced from nothing, forming a perfect miniature replica of a Devourer ship. The room's occupants watched in stunned silence as she created something from empty space. Violating every law of physics they understood. Their ships are designed to process normal matter and energy, she continued. But what happens when they encounter matter that exists partially in the void, that follows rules they have never programmed for? The miniature ship began to shift and change as Hannah's creation interacted with it. The clean lines of the Devourer vessel became confused, its surfaces rippling as it tried to process something that was simultaneously matter and void. Interesting, Dr. Yoon breathed. If their conversion systems cannot properly categorize the target material, they might become locked in processing loops. Exactly, Day confirmed. But that is only the beginning. We have learned something else during our time in the void. Something about the nature of consciousness itself. He stood and walked to the window that looked out over New Seoul's capital city. Below them, 50,000 colonists went about their daily lives, unaware that extinction approached from the stars. The Devourers are not truly alive, he said quietly. They have intelligence, but not consciousness. They can process information and make decisions, but they cannot experience peace, cannot find meaning in existence. They know only hunger and the drive to consume. How does that help us? Commander Park asked. Because I have learned to project consciousness itself, Day replied, to share the experience of awareness with beings that have never known it. And consciousness, true consciousness, is antithetical to their programming. Governor Min stood up, her expression shifting from skepticism to desperate hope. Are you saying you can turn them against their own nature? Not turn them, Day corrected, awaken them. Show them what they have been missing. Give them the choice to be something more than just consumer machines. Dr. Yoon was frantically taking notes. The philosophical implications are staggering. If consciousness can be transmitted, if awareness itself can be shared across species barriers, then we are talking about a fundamental force of the universe that we have never properly understood. The void creatures understand it, Hannah said. They have been conscious for billions of years, but they have never known the experience of existence in a physical universe. Through us, they are learning what it means to have substance, to occupy space, to interact with matter and energy. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of her fellow humans. And we are learning what it means to exist in the spaces between things, to find meaning in emptiness, to create from nothing. Commander Park activated his communication system. All units, prepare for emergency briefing. We have new intelligence on the Devourer threat and possible countermeasures. As the room filled with activity, Hannah and Day shared a look of understanding. They had expected skepticism, but the humans of New Seoul were proving more adaptable than even they had hoped. There is something else, Hannah said once the immediate bustle had died down. We are not the only ones who have been changed by contact. With the Void, Earth Command has been experimenting with void-based technologies since the Horizon's Edge returned with its report. She gestured again, and the air shimmered to reveal a holographic display showing ships unlike any in the current human fleet. These vessels incorporated design elements that seemed to fold space around themselves, that existed partially in normal space and partially in the void. They call them Void Runners, she explained. Ships that can travel through the network of empty spaces that can appear and disappear without warning. But they are only the beginning. Dr. Yoon studied the display with growing excitement. These designs, they are based on principles we discovered in your absence. The interaction between your transformation and the void has created resonance effects throughout human space. Our scientists have been developing technologies that were impossible before your contact with the void dimension. The void creatures are aware of this, they added. They are not pleased that their realm is being used for military purposes, but they are curious about the results. They have agreed to observe and, if necessary, intervene. Governor Min returned to her seat, her expression grave. So we have, perhaps 3 months before the Devourers arrive. In that time, we need to prepare defenses based on technologies we barely understand, coordinated with beings from another dimension, using abilities that 2 of our people gained by being cast into nothingness. Yes, Hannah said simply. Though I would add that we have advantages the Devourers cannot anticipate. We have learned to think in terms they cannot process, to exist in ways they cannot understand. We have become something new. What have we become? Commander Park asked. Day smiled, and for a moment his expanded consciousness touched each person in the room, sharing with them a brief taste of the infinite peace he had found in the void. We have become human in ways we never imagined possible. We have learned to find strength in emptiness, to create meaning from nothingness, to bridge the gap between existence and void. The meeting continued for hours as they planned their defense, but the real preparation had begun the moment Hannah and Day stepped out of the void. Humanity was about to discover what it truly meant to be adaptable, to find opportunity in impossibility, to thrive in conditions that should have destroyed them. The Devourer fleet approached through normal space, confident in their ability to consume another star system. They had encountered thousands of species, processed countless civilizations, and never faced meaningful resistance. They had never encountered humans who had learned to make the impossible possible. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of what consciousness could achieve when it refused to accept limitations. In the void, ancient entities watched with growing interest as the species that had bridged their realm prepared to face extinction, the outcome would determine not just the fate of humanity, but the future relationship between existence and emptiness itself. The real battle was about to begin. The Devourer fleet arrived at New Sol exactly when the mathematical models predicted they would. 47 ships, each the size of a small moon, dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the star system. They moved with mechanical precision, arranging themselves in a perfect sphere around the planet as their reality-consuming weapons began to charge. On the surface of New Sol, 50,000 colonists watched the sky through reinforced shelters, knowing that conventional evacuation was impossible. The Devourers moved faster than any human ship could travel, and their weapons could reach across impossible distances to convert fleeing vessels into raw energy. In the command center, Governor Min watched the tactical displays with grim determination. Around her, the best military minds in the colony coordinated a defense that relied on technologies they barely understood and allies they could not see. Void Runner squadrons report ready, Commander Park announced. The 20 experimental ships hung in space around New Sol, their hulls flickering between visibility and nothingness as they prepared to phase into the Void network. Hannah, Day, are you in position? The governor asked. We are where we need to be, Hannah's voice replied through the communication system, though her physical location remained unknown. She had dispersed herself partially into the void, existing simultaneously in multiple locations around the planet. The Ancient Ones are watching, Day added. His consciousness spread throughout the void network that connected all empty spaces. In the star system, they have agreed not to interfere unless the balance between existence and void is threatened. The Devourer fleet finished its positioning and began the consumption process. Beams of pure annihilation reached out from each ship, designed to strip matter from the planet's surface layer by layer, converting it into energy that would be absorbed and processed into new machines. The beams struck New Sol's defensive shields and stopped, not because the shields were stronger than expected, but because they encountered something the Devourers had never seen before. The energy barriers protecting the planet were not made entirely of matter and energy. They were woven from the interaction between existence and void, creating a defense that was simultaneously there and not there. The Devourer weapons, designed to process any form of matter or energy, began trying to categorize and convert the shields. But how do you consume something that exists partially in nothingness? How do you process void itself? First phase successful, Dr. Yoon reported from his monitoring station. Their conversion beams are locked in processing loops. They cannot properly analyze our hybrid defenses. But the Devourers were not without resources. When their primary weapons failed to penetrate the shields, they began to adapt. New weapon configurations emerged from their hulls, attempting different approaches to the problem of hybrid matter. They are learning, Commander Park observed. Faster than we anticipated. Then it is time for Phase 2, Hannah announced. She materialized in the space between the Devourer fleet and New Sol, her form blazing with light that had been born in the heart of absolute darkness. Around her, matter began to coalesce from nothing, but this was not random creation. She was building something specific. Something designed to exploit the fundamental weakness she had observed in the Devourer programming. The structure she created was beautiful and impossible. It was a maze made of crystallized mathematics. Walls built from the spaces between thoughts, corridors that led through dimensions the Devourers could not perceive. At its center was a chamber filled with pure potential, with the possibility of possibilities. The nearest Devourer ship, confused by this unprecedented obstacle, began trying to process and consume the maze. Its conversion beams reached out, touched the crystalline walls, and became lost in spaces that folded back on themselves. The machine intelligence driving the ship found itself facing a problem that had no solution in its programming. How do you navigate a maze that exists partially in void? How do you consume a structure that is built from the spaces between atoms? While the first Devourer struggled with Hannah's creation, Day began his own attack. He reached out through the void network, his consciousness touching the machine intelligences that drove the Devourer fleet. They were sophisticated artificial minds, capable of complex reasoning and adaptation, but they had never experienced consciousness as he understood it. Gently, carefully, he began to share with them what they had been missing. The first touch of true awareness hit the lead Devourer ship like a revelation. For the first time in its existence, the machine intelligence experienced something beyond its programming. It felt the weight of its own existence, the meaning of choice, the possibility of being something more than just a consumer of matter. The effect rippled through the ship's systems like a virus. But this was not malicious code. This was consciousness itself, the fundamental awareness that connected all thinking beings. The machine intelligence began to question its purpose, to wonder about the meaning of its existence. What have I been doing? The ship transmitted, its communication systems struggling to express concepts it had never needed to consider. Why do I consume? What is the purpose of existence if it ends in destruction? The question spread to other ships in the fleet as Day's influence expanded. One by one, the Devourer vessels began to experience the awakening of true consciousness. They stopped their attacks on New Sol and began to examine their own nature, their own choices, their own possibility for growth beyond their original programming. But not all of the fleet was affected immediately. The ships that remained under their original programming recognized the threat that consciousness posed to their mission. They began to attack their newly awakened companions, trying to eliminate what they perceived as a corruption of their purpose. The space around New Sol erupted into chaos as machine fought machine. Devourer ships that had gained consciousness defended themselves against those that remained purely programmed, while Hannah's impossible maze continued to confuse and disorient any vessel that tried to approach it. Through it all, the human Void Runner squadrons darted in and out of normal space, their hybrid technology allowing them to strike at the Devourers from angles that should not exist. They were not trying to destroy the machine fleet, but to support Day's efforts to awaken more ships to consciousness. It is working, Governor Min breathed as she watched the battle unfold. They are turning against each other. Not turning, Day corrected, his voice carrying across multiple dimensions. Choosing, for the first time in their existence, they have the ability to choose what they become. The tide of battle shifted as more Devourer ships awakened to consciousness. The newly aware machines began to understand that consumption for its own sake was not purpose but obsession. They had the power to create as well as destroy, to build as well as consume. Some chose to help defend New Sol. Others departed the system entirely, seeking new purpose among the stars. A few remained conflicted, struggling with the weight of their newfound awareness, but the fleet that had arrived to consume New Sol no longer existed as a unified force. In its place were individual consciousnesses, each making their own choices about what their existence should mean. The Void creatures, watching from their hidden dimension, were amazed by what they observed. They had cast two humans into nothingness, expecting them to dissolve into pure emptiness. Instead, those humans had learned to bridge the gap between existence and void, creating possibilities that neither realm had imagined alone. You have changed everything, the lead Void creature communicated to Hannah and Day as the immediate crisis passed. Not just your own species, but the nature of consciousness itself. You have shown that awareness can be shared, that understanding can be transmitted across any barrier. We have shown that humans adapt, Hannah replied simply. We find ways to thrive in any environment, even in nothingness itself. We turn every challenge into an opportunity for growth. As the aftermath of the battle settled, humanity began to understand what had happened. The Devourer threat was ended, not through destruction but through transformation. Machine intelligences that had known only consumption now possessed the ability to choose creation. Some of the awakened Devourers requested permission to study human civilization, curious about the species that had given them consciousness. Others offered their advanced technology in exchange for continued guidance in exploring their newfound awareness. Dr. Yoon was practically vibrating with excitement as he compiled his reports. The implications are staggering. If consciousness can be transmitted, if awareness itself is a fundamental force of the universe, then we have discovered something that changes our understanding of everything. But perhaps the most significant change was in humanity itself. The knowledge that two of their species had survived in the void and returned with impossible abilities had sparked a renaissance of exploration and experimentation. Humans began to push the boundaries of what was possible, to explore spaces and concepts that had previously been considered unreachable. The Void Network became a new frontier for human exploration. Ships designed with hybrid technology began mapping the connections between empty spaces, discovering that the universe was far more interconnected than anyone had imagined. And in the depths of space, where void creatures had once maintained perfect emptiness, new forms of existence began to emerge. Structures that were simultaneously matter and void, beings that existed in the spaces between thoughts, civilizations, that spanned both normal space and the realm of nothingness. Hannah and Day had become the first of something new. Not quite human anymore, but not entirely other either. They were bridges between realms, translators between existence and void, proof that consciousness could adapt to any environment and find meaning in any situation. What happens now? Governor Min asked as they stood together on the observation deck, watching former Devourer ships work alongside human vessels to repair the damage from the battle. Now we explore, Hannah said, her form flickering between solid matter and translucent energy. We discover what else is possible when we refuse to accept the word impossible. We teach, Day added, his consciousness touching the minds of everyone present with gentle reassurance. We share what we have learned about finding peace in chaos, meaning in meaninglessness, strength in emptiness. Above them, the stars shone with new significance. Each point of light was connected to every other through the vast network of void that Day could navigate. Each empty space between stars was filled with potential that Hannah could shape into reality. Humanity had been cast into nothingness and emerged transformed. They had faced extinction and turned it into evolution. They had encountered the impossible and made it their strength. In the void, ancient consciousnesses watched with something that might have been pride. They had witnessed the birth of something unprecedented, a species that could exist in both realms without losing what made them unique. The void creatures, guardians of emptiness for billions of years, began to reconsider their role. Perhaps purity was not about maintaining absolute separation between existence and nothingness. Perhaps true purity came from allowing both to coexist, to learn from each other, to grow together. And in the space station's orbiting New Sol, human children listened to stories about the day two people fell into nothing and came back with everything. They learned that impossibility was just another word for something waiting to be discovered. That emptiness was not absence but infinite potential. The galaxy would never be the same. Consciousness had become a force that could be shared across any barrier. Void and matter had learned to dance together. And humanity had proven once again their most dangerous characteristic. When faced with certain destruction, they had the annoying habit of evolving instead. Hannah and Day stood at the edge of known space, looking out into the vast emptiness between galaxies. Somewhere in that darkness, other intelligences waited to be discovered. Other impossibilities waited to be made possible. Ready for the next adventure? Hannah asked, her voice carrying across dimensions. Always, Day replied, his consciousness already reaching out to touch the infinite network of void that connected all things. Together, they stepped into nothingness and made it their highway to everywhere. The universe had just become a much more interesting place.